In the grand halls of Haverford Manor, a young heiress lies dead, strangled in a locked room, clutching a shattered crimson locket. Hercule Poirot unravels a web of betrayal, envy, and hidden affairs. Was it her charming lover, desperate to hide a scandal? Her envious cousin, coveting the fortune? Or the timid maid, concealing a secret? As clues unravel, a hidden pouch, a scratched floor, a cunning bolt trick, the locket reveals a truth that could destroy them all. Will Poirot unlock the mystery before the killer strikes again? Chapter 1. The Locked Room. The autumn wind howled outside Haverford Manor, rattling the leaded windows of the grand drawing-room where Hercule Poirot stood, his small, precise figure a stark contrast to the room's opulent chaos. The air was heavy with the scent of old money, polished mahogany, beeswax candles, and the faint tang of wood smoke from the fireplace. Portraits of stern-faced Haverfords glared down from gilded frames, their eyes seeming to follow the diminutive detective as he adjusted his immaculate black tie and brushed an invisible speck from his sleeve. His moustache, a masterpiece of symmetry, twitched slightly as he surveyed the scene. Inspector Japp, his weathered face etched with fatigue, stood near the fireplace, warming his hands, though the room was far from cold. "It's a grim affair, Poirot," he said, his voice low, as if the walls themselves might overhear. "Miss Eleanor Haverford, all of 25, found dead in her bedroom this morning. Strangled, the doctor says, and the door bolted from the inside. Not a soul could have got in or out." Poirot's green eyes gleamed with that peculiar light that always preceded his pursuit of truth. "A locked room, you say, mon ami?" His voice was soft, almost musical, with the faintest trace of his Belgian accent. "And yet, someone has committed murder. The impossible is merely the possible in disguise, n'est-ce pas?" Japp grunted, shifting his weight. He was a man of facts, not fancies, and the puzzle before him was maddening. The window was locked too, and it's 3 stories up. No ledges, no way to climb. We've got 3 suspects so far. Her lover, Richard Marlowe, a charming sort with no money to his name. Her cousin, Beatrice Langley, a sharp-tongued spinster who's next in line for the fortune. And the maid, Clara Dobbs, a nervous little thing who found the body. Poirot clasped his hands behind his back, his patent leather shoes clicking softly on the parquet floor as he began to pace. "And this locket you mentioned, Inspector. Tell me of it." Japp gestured toward a side table where a constable stood guard over a small evidence tray. On it lay a silver heart-shaped locket, its crimson enamel inlay cracked and splintered, as if it had been struck with deliberate force. "She was clutching it when we found her," Japp said. "Smashed to bits, like someone wanted it destroyed. No one knows what was inside. No photograph, no note, nothing." Poirot approached the tray, his movements deliberate, almost feline. He bent forward, his magnifying glass catching the firelight as he examined the locket. The damage was not random. The hinge was shattered, the clasp twisted beyond repair. "Curieux," he murmured. "This was no accident. The locket, it speaks, Inspector. It tells us the killer had a purpose beyond murder." Japp raised an eyebrow. "You're seeing clues in a bit of broken jewelry already?" Poirot smiled, a small, enigmatic curve of his lips. "The little grey cells, they begin their work. A locked room, a broken locket, a dead heiress. These are not separate mysteries, but threads of the same tapestry. We must find how they weave together." He straightened, turning to face the room. The Manor's staff hovered at the edges, their faces pale, their whispers hushed. The butler, a stooped man named Hargreaves, stood rigidly by the door, his eyes fixed on the floor. A parlour-maid lingered near the tea-tray, her hands trembling as she adjusted a saucer. Grief, fear, or guilt? Poirot wondered. The human heart was a labyrinth, and he was its cartographer. "Take me to the room, Inspector," Poirot said, his tone brisk. "I must see where Mademoiselle Eleanor met her end." The bedroom was up a sweeping staircase, down a corridor lined with tapestries depicting pastoral scenes that seemed jarringly serene. Eleanor's door was heavy oak, its brass bolt gleaming under the constable's lantern. Inside, the room was a study in feminine elegance, silk drapes in soft lavender, a four-poster bed with embroidered linens, a vanity cluttered with crystal perfume bottles, and a silver-backed hairbrush. The air held a faint trace of jasmine, Eleanor's scent, now mingled with the cold finality of death. The body had been removed, but Poirot could envision her there, sprawled on the Persian rug, her delicate hands clutching the shattered locket. He knelt beside the bed, his gloved fingers tracing the floor. A faint scratch, barely visible, caught his eye near the bedpost. "Intéressant," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Something was moved here, perhaps in haste. Japp frowned, crouching beside him. "What are you on about, Poirot? It's just a scratch." "To you, perhaps, mon ami. To Hercule Poirot, it is a whisper of truth." He rose, dusting his knees with a handkerchief. The room was locked, yes, but locks can be persuaded. And this locket, its destruction, was no afterthought. It was central to the crime. Japp sighed, running a hand through his thinning hair. "You're making my head spin, Poirot. We've got Marlowe, Langley, and Dobbs to question, and all of them swear they were nowhere near this room at 6 this morning when the doctor says she died." Poirot's eyes twinkled. "Then we shall question them, Inspector, and we shall listen, not only to their words, but to what they do not say. For it is in the silences, the hesitations, that the truth hides." As they left the room, Poirot paused at the threshold, glancing back at the empty space where Eleanor Haverford had breathed her last. The locked room was no mystery, he thought. The true enigma was the heart of the killer, and the secret of the Crimson Locket. Chapter 2. The Heiress's Shadow. The library of Haverford Manor was a cavern of knowledge, its towering shelves heavy with leather-bound tomes that smelled of dust and time. The room was dimly lit by a chandelier, its crystals casting fractured prisms across the walls, and a fire crackled in the grate, though it did little to warm the chill of suspicion that hung in the air. Hercule Poirot sat in a high-backed chair, his small, fastidious hands folded neatly in his lap, his green eyes fixed on Beatrice Langley, who stood before him like a general facing a court-martial. Her posture was rigid, her dark hair pulled tightly into a bun, and her grey eyes glinted with a defiance that intrigued the detective. Inspector Japp, ever the pragmatist, leaned against a bookcase, his notebook open, his pencil poised. He had seen Poirot at work before, unravelling mysteries with the precision of a watchmaker, but the locked-room murder of Eleanor Haverford was a puzzle that vexed even his seasoned instincts. "Miss Langley," Japp began, his tone gruff, "you were Miss Haverford's cousin, and by all accounts her closest living relative. Where were you at 6 this morning when she was found dead?" Beatrice's lips pursed, as if the question were an affront to her dignity. "I was in the gardens, Inspector," she said, her voice crisp as autumn leaves. "I walk there every morning at dawn. It clears the mind. Alone? Poirot's voice was soft, almost a caress, but it carried a weight that made Beatrice's shoulders stiffen. Yes, alone, she replied, meeting his gaze. I find solitude preferable to the company of fools. Poirot's moustache twitched, a faint smile lurking beneath it. A sentiment I understand, mademoiselle. But solitude, it is a poor witness. No one saw you in the gardens. Beatrice's fingers tightened around the edge of her shawl. The gardeners were not yet at work. It was barely light. Poirot tilted his head, his eyes never leaving her face. And what was your relationship with Mademoiselle Eleanor? You were close, oui? Beatrice hesitated, a flicker of something, grief, perhaps, or resentment, crossing her features. We were cousins, Monsieur Poirot, but not confidant. Eleanor was reckless. She had the Haverford fortune at her fingertips, yet she squandered her time on frivolous pursuits and unsuitable men. By which you mean Monsieur Richard Marlowe? Poirot's tone was light, but his question was a scalpel, probing for truth. Beatrice's jaw tightened. Precisely. A man with no prospects, no breeding, and no ambition beyond charming his way into her. Inheritance? I warned her repeatedly, but she was blind to his faults. Poirot leaned forward, his fingers steepled. And this inheritance, mademoiselle, it would come to you, would it not, if Eleanor died without a will? Her eyes flashed, but her voice remained steady. I suppose so. The Haverford estate is entailed to the nearest relative, but I have no need of her money. My father left me a comfortable income, and I live modestly. Modesty, Poirot mused, is a virtue. But money, it is a motive that wears many disguises. Tell me, did you ever see the locket that Eleanor wore? The one found broken in her hand? Beatrice's gaze flickered to the fire, and for a moment her composure seemed to waver. Yes, I saw it often. A silver heart with a crimson inlay. She said it was a gift from her mother, who died when Eleanor was a child. She never took it off. And its contents. Poirot's voice was gentle, but insistent. Did she ever show you what was inside? No, Beatrice said quickly. Too quickly, Poirot thought. It was private, she said. I never pressed her. Poirot nodded, his mind cataloguing her words, her pauses, her fleeting glances. Merci, Mademoiselle Langley. You may go, for now. As Beatrice swept from the room, her skirts rustling like whispers, Japp closed his notebook with a snap. She's a cold one, Poirot. Didn't shed a tear for her cousin. And that walk in the gardens, no alibi worth a farthing. Précisément, Poirot said, rising and adjusting his cufflinks. But it is not her coldness that interests me, mon ami. It is her precision. She speaks as one who has rehearsed her answers. We must learn why. The morning wore on, and Poirot's inquiries took him through the labyrinthine corridors of Haverford Manor. The house was a living museum, its walls adorned with tapestries and portraits that told the story of a family steeped in wealth and pride. Eleanor Haverford had been the last of her line, a young woman whose beauty and fortune had made her the envy of many, and, perhaps, the target of one. Poirot's little grey cells hummed with possibilities as he considered the suspects. Beatrice, with her sharp tongue and solitary habits. Richard Marlowe, the charming lover with a rumoured wandering eye. And Clara Dobbs, the timid maid whose nervousness hinted at secrets untold. He requested a tour of the estate, accompanied by Hargreaves, the butler, a man whose stooped frame and lined face suggested years of silent service. As they walked through the gardens, Poirot noted the dew still clinging to the roses, the air crisp with the promise of frost. "These are the gardens where Mademoiselle Langley walks?" he asked. "Yes, sir," Hargreaves replied, his voice a low rumble. "She's out here every morning, rain or shine. Keeps to herself, mostly." Poirot paused by a stone bench, its surface worn smooth by time. "And this morning, did you see her?" Hargreaves shook his head. "I was in the house, sir, preparing the breakfast trays. The gardeners start at 7, so the grounds were empty at dawn." Poirot's eyes narrowed. "Empty, you say? Yet someone was in Mademoiselle Eleanor's room, committing murder. Tell me, Monsieur Hargreaves, what was Eleanor like?" The butler's expression softened, a rare crack in his professional veneer. "She was kind, sir, full of life, always laughing, always planning some new adventure. It broke her heart when her mother passed, and she wore that locket like a talisman. But lately—" He hesitated, his eyes darting away. "Oui?" Poirot prompted, his voice gentle but firm. "She seemed troubled, sir. Quiet, like she was carrying a burden. I heard her arguing with Mr. Marlowe a few nights ago, though I couldn't catch the words." Poirot filed this away, his mind turning like the gears of a finely crafted clock. "And Mademoiselle Beatrice? Did she and Eleanor argue?" Hargreaves shifted uncomfortably. "Not that I saw, sir, but they weren't close. Miss Beatrice is stern. She disapproved of Miss Eleanor's ways." Poirot thanked the butler and dismissed him, lingering in the garden as the sun climbed higher. The roses, he thought, were beautiful but thorny, much like the truth he sought. Beatrice's alibi was unverified, her motives murky. Had she resented Eleanor's freedom, her wealth, her choice of lover? Or was there something deeper, a secret hidden in the shadow of the heiress? Returning to the manor, Poirot sought out the housekeeper, Mrs. Grayson, a stout woman with a no-nonsense air. She was in the linen room, folding sheets with the precision of a military drill. "Monsieur Poirot," she said, her tone respectful, but wary. "How can I assist you?" "I wish to know of the household, madame," Poirot said, his eyes scanning the neat stacks of linens. "The dynamics, the tensions. Mademoiselle Eleanor was the heart of this house, was she not?" Mrs. Grayson nodded, her hands pausing. "She was, sir. The staff adored her. She had a way of making everyone feel seen, from the scullery maid to the gardener. But she was headstrong, and that caused friction." "With whom?" Poirot's question was sharp, like a dart seeking its mark. "With Miss Beatrice, for one," Mrs. Grayson said. "They were like chalk and cheese. Miss Eleanor all warmth and impulse, Miss Beatrice cold and calculating. Miss Beatrice thought Eleanor was throwing her life away on Mr. Marlowe." "And you, madame? What did you think of Monsieur Marlowe?" Mrs. Grayson's lips thinned. "He's charming, I'll give him that. But charm can hide a multitude of sins. I saw him once in the village, talking to a young lady, a Miss Florence Tate. It didn't look like a casual chat." Poirot's moustache quivered with interest. "Miss Florence Tate, you say? And this was recent?" "A fortnight ago, sir. I didn't tell Miss Eleanor. It wasn't my place." Poirot thanked her and moved on, his mind alight with new connections. Richard Marlowe's infidelity, if true, was a thread that could unravel the entire tapestry. Had Eleanor discovered it? Had it driven her to despair or to confrontation? And what of Beatrice, whose disapproval of Marlowe seemed to border on obsession? He returned to the library, where Japp was waiting, poring over his notes. "Any luck, Poirot?" the inspector asked, his tone hopeful, but tinged with frustration. Luck, mon ami, is for those who do not think, Poirot replied, settling into his chair. I have learned much, but the picture is not yet complete. Mademoiselle Beatrice is a woman of control, yet her control conceals passion, perhaps envy, perhaps ambition. And Monsieur Marlowe, he is not all he seems. There is talk of another woman. Japp's eyebrows rose. Another woman? That's motive, Poirot. If Eleanor found out, it could have pushed Marlowe to murder. Perhaps, Poirot said, his voice thoughtful. But we must not leap to conclusions. The locket, the locked room, the scratch on the floor. These are pieces of a puzzle, and we must fit them together with care. He rose, his movements precise, and requested to see Eleanor's personal effects. Japp led him to a small parlour where the heiress's belongings had been gathered for inspection. Among them were letters, a diary, and a collection of jewellery. But Poirot's attention was drawn to a small velvet box, empty, but for a faint indentation in the shape of a heart. The locket, he murmured. It lived here, oui? Japp nodded. The maid said Eleanor kept it on her always, even when she slept. Poirot's fingers traced the velvet. Then why was it broken? To destroy its contents, or to create a false narrative? The killer wished us to see violence, chaos, but Hercule Poirot sees order beneath the disorder. Chapter 3. The Lover's Secret. The conservatory of Haverford Manor was a glass-walled sanctuary, its air thick with the humid sweetness of orchids and the faint tang of damp earth. Sunlight filtered through the panes, casting dappled patterns on the tiled floor where Hercule Poirot stood, his polished shoes gleaming like twin mirrors. His small, meticulous frame seemed almost out of place among the lush greenery, yet his presence commanded the space. His green eyes sharp as they fixed on Richard Marlowe, who sat on a wicker chair, his handsome features marred by a nervous twitch in his jaw. The young man's hands, though clasped tightly, betrayed a tremor, and Poirot noted it with the precision of a jeweller examining a flawed gem. Inspector Japp, standing near a cluster of blooming lilies, wiped his brow with a handkerchief. The conservatory's warmth was oppressive, but he suspected the real heat came from the questions they were about to ask. "Mr. Marlowe," Japp began, his voice gruff but measured, "you were Miss Eleanor. Haverford's fiancée, correct? Due to marry next month." Marlowe nodded, his dark eyes flickering with something Poirot could not yet name. Grief, perhaps, or guilt. "Yes, Inspector. We were in love. Eleanor was everything to me." Poirot tilted his head, his moustache a perfect crescent above his lips. "A beautiful sentiment, Monsieur Marlowe. And yet, love, it is a complex tapestry, woven with threads of truth and deception. Tell me, where were you at 6 this morning, when Mademoiselle Eleanor was strangled in her locked room?" Marlowe's fingers tightened, his knuckles whitening. "I was in my room, asleep. I'd stayed the night at the manor. Eleanor often invited me to dine and stay over. I didn't hear anything until Clara's scream woke me." "Alone, monsieur?" Poirot's voice was soft, almost a purr, but it carried a weight that made Marlowe shift in his seat. "Yes, alone," he said, his tone defensive. It was early. The house was quiet. Poirot's eyes narrowed, catching the slight hesitation in Marlowe's words. "A quiet house, oui, yet death was loud within it. You heard nothing, saw nothing? Most convenient." Japp coughed, sensing Poirot's probing was about to sharpen. "Mr. Marlowe, we've had reports of tension between you and Miss Haverford, an argument, a few nights ago. Care to explain?" Marlowe's face flushed, but he met Japp's gaze. "It was nothing serious. A lover's quarrel. Eleanor was upset about some trivial matter. Wedding plans, I think. We sorted it out." Poirot stepped closer, his movements deliberate, like a cat circling its prey. "Trivial, you say? And yet, Monsieur Marlowe, there are whispers of another woman. A certain Mademoiselle Florence Tate, perhaps?" The name struck Marlowe like a physical blow. His eyes widened, and for a moment his composure cracked, revealing a flash of panic. "Florence?" "That was a misunderstanding. A brief acquaintance, nothing more. Eleanor knew nothing of it." Poirot's smile was polite but piercing. "A misunderstanding that lingered in the village, where you were seen speaking with Mademoiselle Tate not 2 weeks ago. Intimately, some might say. Secrets, monsieur. They are like shadows. They follow you, even in the light." Marlowe rose, his fists clenched. "I loved Eleanor. I'd never hurt her. Whatever you've heard about Florence, it's gossip, nothing more. I ended any contact with her before Eleanor and I became engaged." "Ended, you say?" Poirot's voice was deceptively mild. Yet the heart, it does not always obey such neat conclusions. "Did Mademoiselle Eleanor suspect your acquaintance? Did she confront you?" "No." Marlowe's voice rose, echoing in the glass enclosure. "She had no reason to. I was devoted to her." Poirot clasped his hands behind his back, pacing slowly past a row of orchids, their petals trembling in the still air. "Devotion, monsieur, is a word easily spoken, but harder to prove. The locket Mademoiselle Eleanor held in death, do you know of it? A silver heart with crimson enamel, broken in her grasp." Marlowe's gaze faltered, dropping to the floor. "Yes, I know it. She wore it always. It was from her mother, a keepsake. She never opened it in my presence." "And yet it was shattered," Poirot said, stopping to face him. "Why, monsieur? A struggle, perhaps, or a deliberate act to hide what it contained?" Marlowe shook his head, his voice low. "I don't know. I swear it." Poirot studied him, noting the sweat beading on his brow, the way his eyes darted to the door as if seeking escape. "Very well, Monsieur Marlowe. For now, you may go. But Hercule Poirot, he does not forget. And the truth, it will not remain hidden." As Marlowe left, his footsteps quick on the tiles, Japp exhaled heavily. "He's hiding something, Poirot. That business with Florence Tate sounds like motive to me. If Eleanor found out he was stepping out on her, it could have pushed him to murder." "Perhaps, mon ami," Poirot said, his eyes lingering on the spot where Marlowe had sat. "But a motive alone does not make a murderer. We must consider the method. The locked room, the broken locket. These are not the acts of a man in a passion, but of one with a plan." Japp frowned, flipping through his notebook. His alibis as thin as Langley's. Asleep in his room. No witnesses. And that argument Hargreaves overheard. Could have been about this Florence woman. Poirot nodded, his mind already weaving connections. "The argument, oui, it is significant. But so is the locket. Its destruction was no accident, Inspector. It was meant to tell us something, or to hide something. We must learn what." Leaving the conservatory, Poirot requested to see Marlowe's room, a guest chamber on the second floor, not far from Eleanor's. The room was Spartan compared to the manor's opulence, a narrow bed, a wardrobe, a writing desk with a few scattered papers. Poirot's keen eyes scanned every detail, pausing at the desk where a fountain pen lay uncapped, its ink dried. "Curieux," he murmured, lifting the pen with a gloved hand. A man who leaves his pen uncapped is a man distracted. Japp snorted. You're reading clues in a pen now? Not the pen, mon ami, but the mind behind it. Poirot opened the desk drawer, revealing a small stack of letters tied with a ribbon. He untied them carefully, scanning the contents. Most were from Eleanor, written in a flowing hand, full of affection and plans for their future. But one letter, tucked at the bottom, was different, written in a sharper script, signed with a single initial. F. Poirot read it silently, his expression unreadable. "My dear Richard," it began, "you cannot cast me aside so easily. We shared something real, and I will not be forgotten." The letter was undated, but the paper was crisp, suggesting it was recent. Japp peered over his shoulder. "Florence Tate, you reckon?" "Almost certainly," Poirot said, folding the letter and slipping it into his pocket. "This is a thread we must follow, Inspector. Mademoiselle Tate may hold the key to Marlowe's heart and to his crime." They descended to the drawing-room, where Poirot requested a moment alone. He stood by the fireplace, the broken locket still vivid in his mind. Its crimson enamel, shattered like a heart, was a symbol of betrayal, he thought. But whose betrayal? Marlowe's for his wandering affections, or another's who sought to use his indiscretion as a weapon? As the clock struck noon, Poirot's thoughts turned to the village where Florence Tate resided. A visit was necessary, but first he would observe Marlowe at luncheon, where the manor's inhabitants would gather under the weight of suspicion. The lover's secret was unraveling, but Poirot knew the truth was still locked away, as tightly as Eleanor's room had been. The dining room was a grand affair, its long table set with silver and crystal, but the atmosphere was funereal. Beatrice Langley sat at one end, her expression icy, while Clara Dobbs moved silently, serving soup with trembling hands. Marlowe entered late, his face pale, and took his seat without meeting anyone's eyes. Poirot watched them all, his little grey cells cataloguing every glance, every pause. The lover's secret was a spark, he thought, and sparks could ignite a fire. Or a murder. Chapter 4. The Maid's Tale. The servants' quarters of Haverford Manor were a world apart from the grandeur above, a labyrinth of narrow corridors and plain, functional rooms tucked beneath the grand staircase. The air here was damp, heavy, with the scent of lye soap and coal dust, and the only light came from a single oil lamp flickering on a scarred wooden table. Hercule Poirot, his impeccable suit a stark contrast to the utilitarian surroundings, sat on a hard-backed chair, his posture as erect as if he were in a drawing-room. Before him stood Clara Dobbs, the maid, her small frame hunched, her hands twisting a faded apron, her eyes, wide and darting like those of a cornered creature, betrayed a nervousness that intrigued the detective. Inspector Japp leaned against the doorframe, his arms crossed, his face set in a frown. He had little patience for what he called the servant class's dramatics, but he trusted Poirot's ability to unearth truths from even the most reluctant witnesses. "Miss Dobbs," Japp said, his tone clipped, "you found Miss Haverford's body this morning. Walk us through it." Every detail, Clara's lips trembled, and she swallowed hard before speaking. I went to her room at 6:30, sir, like always, to bring her morning tea. I knocked, but there was no answer. I thought she might be sleeping, but when I pushed the door, it wouldn't budge. The bolt was drawn. I called out, and when she didn't reply, I got scared. I fetched Mr. Hargreaves, and he broke the door down. That's when we saw her, lying there, all still, with that locket in her hand." Poirot's green eyes, sharp as cut emeralds, studied her face. "You were alone when you went to her room, mademoiselle? No one else was in the corridor?" Clara shook her head vigorously, her mousy hair slipping from its pins. "No, sir. The house was quiet. Most of the staff were still in their beds or starting their chores downstairs." "And the locket," Poirot said, his voice soft but insistent, like a melody that lingers. "You say it was in her hand. Broken? Had you seen it before, this locket with the crimson enamel?" Clara's fingers stilled, and for a moment her gaze dropped to the floor. "Yes, sir. Miss Eleanor wore it every day. She said it was from her mother, who passed when she was young. She'd touch it sometimes, like it was a charm. I never saw it open, though." Poirot leaned forward, his hands clasped, his moustache twitching slightly. "Never, mademoiselle. Not even a glimpse of what it held. A photograph, perhaps, or a lock of hair." "No, sir," Clara said, her voice barely above a whisper. "She kept it in private. Said it was her heart's secret." Poirot's eyes narrowed, catching the faint quiver in her tone. "A heart's secret, oui. And yet it was shattered in death. Tell me, Mademoiselle Dobbs, where were you at 6 o'clock, when the doctor believes Miss Eleanor was killed?" Clara's hands resumed their twisting, the apron now a crumpled knot. "I was in the pantry, sir, polishing the silver. It's my morning task. Mr. Hargreaves can vouch for me. He saw me there before I went up with the tea." Japp made a note, his pencil scratching loudly in the quiet room. "Hargreaves confirms it," he said to Poirot. "She was in the pantry from 5:30 to 6:30. Solid alibi, unless the butler's lying." Poirot's smile was faint, enigmatic. "An alibi, Inspector, is only as strong as the truth behind it. Mademoiselle Dobbs, you were fond of your mistress, were you not?" Clara's eyes welled with tears, and she nodded. "She was kind, sir. Always had a smile for me, even when I spilled the tea or forgot something. Not like—" She stopped, biting her lip. "Not like whom?" Poirot's question was gentle, but it carried the weight of a command. Clara hesitated, her gaze flicking to Japp, then back to Poirot. "Not like Miss Beatrice, sir. She's strict, always watching, always finding fault. She didn't like Miss Eleanor's ways, said she was too free with her money and her heart." Poirot's fingers tapped his knee, a rhythmic signal of his mind at work. "And Monsieur Marlowe? What did you think of him?" Clara's cheeks flushed, and she looked away. "He was charming, sir. Miss Eleanor loved him. But I heard them arguing once, a week ago, in the drawing room. I was dusting nearby, and I couldn't help but overhear. She was upset, saying something about trust. He sounded angry, then quiet, like he was trying to soothe her." Poirot's moustache quivered with interest. "Trust, you say? A word that carries many meanings. Did you hear anything else, mademoiselle? A name, perhaps?" Clara shook her head, her voice small. "No, sir. I moved away, quick. It wasn't my place to listen." Poirot nodded, his expression unreadable. "Merci, Mademoiselle Dobbs. You have been most helpful. You may return to your duties." As Clara scurried from the room, her footsteps echoing in the corridor, Japp pushed off the doorframe. "She's scared, Poirot, but I don't see a killer in her. Too timid, and that alibi's tight. Hargreaves isn't the sort to lie for a maid." "Perhaps not," Poirot said, rising and brushing an imaginary speck from his sleeve. "But fear mon ami, is a powerful lens. It distorts, but it also reveals. Mademoiselle Dobbs knows more than she says, though she may not realize it herself. The argument she overheard, it is another thread in our tapestry. They left the servants' quarters and ascended to the main hall, where the manor's grandeur reasserted itself in polished marble and gilded mirrors. Poirot paused before a portrait of a woman with Eleanor's features, her eyes soft but sad, a silver locket gleaming at her throat. "The mother," he murmured. Her gift to Eleanor was more than jewelry. It was a symbol, perhaps a warning. Japp scratched his head. "You're losing me, Poirot. You think the locket's the key to this?" "Not the key, Inspector, but the lock. And to open it, we must find what it guarded." Poirot's mind turned to the scratch on Eleanor's floor, the empty velvet pouch he would later discover. Had Clara seen something she hadn't mentioned? A fleeting glimpse of the locket's contents, perhaps, or a shadow in the corridor. Her nervousness suggested a truth half buried, waiting to be unearthed. He requested to speak with Hargreaves again, and the butler appeared promptly, his stooped frame moving with quiet dignity. "Monsieur Hargreaves," Poirot began, "you confirmed Mademoiselle Dobbs was in the pantry this morning. You are certain of the time?" Hargreaves nodded, his lined face impassive. "Yes, sir. I saw her there at 5:30, polishing the silver. She was still at it when I passed again at 6:15, before she went up with the tea." "And you saw no one else near Mademoiselle Eleanor's room?" Poirot's voice was gentle, but his eyes were piercing. "No, sir. The house was quiet, as it always is at that hour. Only Miss Beatrice was up early, walking in the gardens." Poirot's moustache twitched. "Merci, Monsieur Hargreaves. Your memory is most precise." As the butler withdrew, Japp frowned. "Everyone's got an alibi, Poirot. But someone's lying. That room was locked tight, and yet Eleanor was strangled. How'd the killer get in and out?" Poirot's eyes gleamed with the thrill of the puzzle. "The locked room, mon ami, is not the mystery it seems. A bolt can be manipulated, a window tampered with, a secret known to one who knows the house well. And Mademoiselle Dobbs, with her timid eyes and trembling hands, she sees more than she speaks. We must watch her closely." The afternoon sun slanted through the hall's tall windows, casting long shadows that seemed to whisper of secrets. Poirot's little grey cells buzzed with activity, piecing together the fragments of the case. Clara's fear, Marlowe's hidden letter, Beatrice's solitary walk. The maid's tale was a thread, delicate but vital, in the intricate web of Eleanor Haverford's murder. And somewhere, in the heart of that web, lay the truth about the Crimson Locket. Chapter 5. The Locket's Mystery. The late afternoon light filtered through the heavy drapes of Eleanor Haverford's bedroom, casting a soft lavender glow across the room's delicate furnishings. Hercule Poirot stood at its centre, his small, meticulous figure a beacon of order amidst the silent chaos of a crime scene. The four-poster bed, its embroidered linens undisturbed, save for the faint indentation where Eleanor's body had lain, seemed to hold the echo of her final moments. The vanity, cluttered with crystal perfume bottles and a silver-backed hairbrush, glinted in the dimness, while the faint scent of jasmine lingered, a ghostly reminder of the heiress who was no more. Inspector Japp hovered near the door, his notebook open, his brow furrowed, as he watched Poirot's methodical inspection. "Mon ami," Poirot said, his voice a quiet melody. "This room, it is a stage, and the murder, a performance. We must look beyond the scenery to find the truth. He moved to the side table where the broken locket rested, its silver heart fractured, its crimson enamel splintered like spilled blood. He lifted it with a gloved hand, turning it under the light of his magnifying glass, which caught the fading sun in a prism of precision. Japp shifted impatiently. It's a queer thing, that locket. Smashed to bits, but no sign of what was inside. The doctor said she was clutching it so tight her nails drew blood. Poirot's eyes gleamed, his moustache twitching with interest. Précisément, Inspector. The locket was not merely broken, it was destroyed with intent. See here. He pointed to the hinge, its metal twisted as if struck with force. This was no accident of a struggle. The killer wished to obliterate its contents, or to make us believe they did. Japp frowned, peering at the locket. You think there was something inside? A photograph, maybe? Or a note? Perhaps, Poirot said, his tone thoughtful. But the absence of evidence, it is itself evidence. The killer took something, or wished us to think they did. We must ask, what was so vital that it warranted such destruction? He set the locket down and turned his attention to the room, his movements deliberate, like a conductor orchestrating a silent symphony. The oak door, its bolt now unlatched, bore the marks of Hargreaves's efforts to break it down. A splintered frame, a dented lock. The window, high and narrow, was securely fastened, its latch untouched, offering no entry from the sheer 3-story drop below. Poirot's gaze settled on the Persian rug, its intricate patterns a tapestry of blues and golds. He knelt, his gloved fingers brushing the fibers, and there it was again. The faint scratch he had noticed before, near the bedpost, a whisper of disruption in the room's perfection. Regardez, Inspector, Poirot said, beckoning Japp closer. This mark, it is not natural. Something was moved here, something heavy enough to leave its trace. Japp crouched, squinting at the scratch. Could be the bed shifted in a struggle. No, Poirot said firmly. The bed is too heavy, and the mark is too precise. It is the trace of something smaller, something deliberate. He ran his fingers along the floor, following the scratch to a point beneath the rug's edge. With a gentle tug, he lifted the rug, revealing a polished floorboard that seemed slightly askew. His eyes lit with triumph. Voilà, mon ami. The stage yields its secrets. Using a letter opener from the vanity, Poirot pried the floorboard loose, revealing a small cavity beneath. Inside lay a velvet pouch, its deep blue fabric faded but intact. He lifted it carefully, opening it to find it empty. Curio, he murmured. An empty hiding place, yet it speaks volumes. Japp's eyes widened. You think the locket's contents were stashed here? Almost certainly, Poirot said, his voice low. A photograph, a letter, a token. Something Mademoiselle Eleanor valued enough to conceal. The killer knew of this place, or found it in their haste. The locket was broken to distract us, to suggest a struggle. But the true theft was here. Japp scratched his head. So the killer strangles her, smashes the locket, and takes whatever was in that pouch. That's a lot of trouble for a bit of jewelry. Not jewelry, Inspector, Poirot corrected, rising and dusting his knees with a handkerchief. A secret. And secrets, they are the currency of murder. We must discover what this pouch held, and who knew of its existence. He moved to the vanity, examining the array of perfumes and trinkets. A small diary, bound in leather, caught his eye. He opened it, scanning pages filled with Eleanor's elegant script, notes on parties, dress fittings, and tender mentions of Richard Marlowe. But one entry, dated a week prior, gave him pause. "R has changed. I saw the letter. My heart is heavy. But I must know the truth." Poirot's fingers tightened on the diary. "The letter, Inspector. It is the one we found in Marlowe's room, from Mademoiselle Florence Tate, I am certain. Eleanor suspected his infidelity. This was no idle quarrel. It was a confrontation waiting to happen." Japp nodded, his expression grim. If she confronted him, it could have pushed him over the edge. Strangle her to keep her quiet, then break the locket to make it look like a robbery gone wrong. "Perhaps," Poirot said, but his tone was cautious. "Yet the locked room, it complicates matters. How did the killer enter and leave without a trace? The bolt, the window? They mock us with their silence." He paced the room, his little grey cells humming with activity. The scratch, the empty pouch, the broken locket. They were pieces of a puzzle, but the picture remained elusive. He paused by the window, gazing out at the gardens below, where Beatrice Langley claimed to have walked at dawn. Could she have known of the pouch, or Clara Dobbs with her nervous eyes and overheard arguments? And Marlowe, with his trembling hands and hidden letter, had he acted alone, or was there another player in this deadly game? "Inspector," Poirot said, turning abruptly. "We must examine the bolt more closely. A locked room is not impregnable. There are tricks, threads, wires, even a clever hand, that can deceive the eye." Japp followed him to the door, where Poirot inspected the bolt with his magnifying glass. The mechanism was simple but sturdy, designed to slide into place from the inside. Yet Poirot's keen eyes spotted a faint abrasion on the bolt's edge, as if something fine, like a thread, had been pulled against it. "Interessant," he murmured. "A possibility emerges, mon ami. The killer may have locked the door after the deed, using a simple device to pull the bolt from outside." Japp's jaw dropped. "You mean they rigged the bolt? That's devilishly clever." "Oui, and it requires knowledge of the house, or of such tricks," Poirot said. "We must consider who among our suspects has the cunning, or the desperation for such a plan." As they left the room, Poirot's mind churned with possibilities. The locket's mystery was deepening, its broken fragments a mirror of Eleanor's shattered life. Was it Marlowe, driven by fear of exposure? Beatrice, with her cold ambition? Or Clara, whose timid facade might hide a sharper mind? The empty pouch was a silent witness, and Poirot knew that to find the truth he must uncover what it had once held, and who had taken it. The manor's clock chimed 5, its toll echoing through the silent halls. Poirot adjusted his tie, his resolve as unyielding as the oak door behind him. The locket's mystery was a lock, and Hercule Poirot was determined to find the key. Chapter 6. The Hidden Affair. The village of Haverford lay a mile from the manor, a quaint cluster of stone cottages and a single cobbled street, where the late afternoon sun cast long shadows over the butcher's shop and the post office. Hercule Poirot, his patent leather shoes clicking on the uneven stones, walked with a purposeful air, his black overcoat buttoned against the autumn chill. Inspector Japp trudged beside him, his face set in a scowl, unaccustomed to the detective's penchant for venturing beyond the crime scene. "I don't see why we're traipsing out here, Poirot," he grumbled, adjusting his hat. "Marlowe's our man, mark my words. That letter from Florence Tate, it's as good as a confession." Poirot's green eyes twinkled, though his expression remained serious. Patience, mon ami. A letter is but a whisper of motive, not proof of murder. Mademoiselle Florence Tate may hold a piece of our puzzle, and Hercule Poirot does not build a case on assumptions alone. They stopped before a modest cottage, its garden bursting with late-blooming roses, their petals a vivid contrast to the grey stone walls. A brass knocker gleamed on the door, and Poirot rapped it sharply, his gloved hand precise. The door opened to reveal Florence Tate, a striking woman in her late 20s, her auburn hair pinned in an elegant chignon, her eyes a sharp blue that assessed her visitors with guarded curiosity. She wore a simple dress of emerald green, its cut suggesting a taste for refinement despite the cottage's humility. "Mademoiselle Tate," Poirot said, bowing slightly, his moustache a perfect crescent. "I am Hercule Poirot, and this is Inspector Japp. We wish to speak with you about a matter concerning Miss Eleanor Haverford." Florence's expressions flickered, a shadow of unease crossing her features. "Eleanor? I heard. What happened? It's dreadful. Please, come in." The parlour was small but tastefully furnished, with lace curtains and a single vase of roses on the mantel. Florence gestured to a pair of armchairs, her movements graceful but tense. "How can I help you, gentlemen?" she asked, seating herself opposite them. Japp opened his notebook, his pencil poised. "Miss Tate, we understand you knew Richard Marlowe. Care to tell us about your relationship?" Florence's lips curved in a faint, bitter smile. "Relationship is a strong word, Inspector. Richard was a dalliance, a charming man who paid me attention last summer. It was brief, and he ended it weeks ago, before his engagement to Eleanor." Poirot leaned forward, his hands clasped, his gaze unwavering. "And you, mademoiselle, were content to let him go? A man of such charm, it is not easy to forget, no?" Her eyes met his, and for a moment a spark of defiance flared. "I had no choice, Monsieur Poirot. Richard made it clear his future was with Eleanor. I'm not one to chase what isn't mine." "Yet you wrote to him," Poirot said softly, producing the letter from his pocket, its sharp script unmistakable. "You cannot cast me aside so easily," you said. "We shared something real. These are not the words of a woman who has moved on." Florence's cheeks flushed, but her voice remained steady. "I wrote that in a moment of weakness. I was hurt, yes, but I didn't pursue him. I haven't seen Richard in a month." Japp's pencil scratched furiously. "Can anyone confirm your whereabouts yesterday morning, Miss Tate?" "Around 6 o'clock. Florence hesitated, her fingers smoothing the fabric of her dress. "I was here, alone, preparing for the day. I don't rise early, Inspector. The village was quiet at that hour." Poirot's moustache twitched, his mind cataloguing her words. "And Mademoiselle Eleanor, did you know her well?" "Barely," Florence said, her tone cool. "We met once or twice at village functions. She was radiant, the kind of woman who drew every eye. I envied her, I suppose, but I wished her no harm." Poirot's eyes narrowed, catching the faint tremor in her voice. "Envy, mademoiselle. It is a subtle poison. Did you ever see the locket she wore? A silver heart with crimson enamel?" Florence shook her head, her expression guarded. "I noticed it once, at a garden party. She touched it often, like it was precious. I never saw it closely." Poirot nodded, his mind turning like the gears of a finely crafted watch. Florence Tate's composure was a mask, he thought, hiding a wound that had not healed. Had her letter to Marlowe been a plea, or a threat? And had Eleanor discovered it, sparking the confrontation that led to her death. "Merci, Mademoiselle Tate," Poirot said, rising. "You have been most helpful. We may speak again." As they left the cottage, Japp muttered, "She's got no alibi, Poirot, and motive aplenty if Eleanor threatened to expose her fling with Marlowe. Could she have slipped into the manor? Possible, but unlikely," Poirot said, his eyes scanning the village street, where a few locals cast curious glances their way. "The manor is not easily breached, and Mademoiselle Tate has no knowledge of its secrets. No, the answer lies closer to home, within its walls, where the locket was broken and the pouch emptied." They returned to the manor as dusk settled, the sky a bruised purple over the rolling lawns. Poirot requested to see Eleanor's diary again, and in the quiet of the library, he pored over its pages. A new entry caught his eye, dated 3 days before her death. "The locket holds my truth, but I fear it will break my heart. I must explain himself, or all is lost." Poirot closed the diary, his fingers lingering on its leather cover. "The hidden affair, Inspector," he said to Japp, who was nursing a cup of tea by the fire. Eleanor knew of Marlowe's connection to Mademoiselle Tate. This entry suggests she was prepared to confront him. But did she? And was it enough to drive him to murder? Japp set down his cup, his expression skeptical. "You're still hung up on that locket, Poirot. Maybe it's just a red herring, a bit of jewellery smashed in the heat of the moment." "Non, mon ami," Poirot said, his voice firm. "The locket is the heart of this mystery. Its destruction was deliberate, a message, or a deception. And the pouch beneath the floorboard, it held something Eleanor feared to lose. We must find what it was." He rose, pacing the library's polished floor, his little grey cells ablaze with connections. Florence Tate's letter, Eleanor's diary, the empty pouch. They pointed to a secret that had cost the heiress her life. Marlowe's charm, Beatrice's ambition, Clara's fear, each was a thread. But which led to the killer? And the locked room, with its faint abrasion on the bolt, whispered of a cunning mind, one that knew the manor's secrets or the art of deception. As the manor's clock chimed 7, Poirot paused by a window, gazing at the darkening gardens. The hidden affair was a spark, he thought, but the fire it ignited was still obscured. The truth lay in the shadows of Haverford Manor, and Hercule Poirot was determined to bring it into the light. Chapter 7. The Cousin's Envy. The dining room of Haverford Manor was a tableau of elegance, its long mahogany table gleaming under the soft glow of a crystal chandelier. Silver candelabras cast flickering shadows on the walls, where ancestral portraits gazed down with silent judgment. The air was heavy with the aroma of roasted pheasant and spiced wine, yet the atmosphere was anything but festive. Hercule Poirot sat at one end of the table, his small, precise figure a study in composure, his green eyes darting from face to face, cataloguing every nuance. Inspector Japp, seated to his right, toyed with his fork, his appetite dimmed by the weight of the unsolved murder. Beatrice Langley presided at the table's head, her posture rigid, her grey dress as severe as her expression. Across from her sat Richard Marlowe, his handsome features drawn, his eyes avoiding hers. Clara Dobbs moved silently around the table, serving dishes with hands that trembled slightly, her face pale in the candlelight. The other servants, Hargreaves, the butler, and Mrs. Grayson, the housekeeper, hovered at the edges, their presence a quiet reminder of the manor's hierarchy. The meal was a formality, a ritual maintained despite the shadow of Eleanor Haverford's death, and Poirot sensed that the true drama would unfold not in the food, but in the silences between words. "Monsieur Poirot," Beatrice said, her voice cutting through the clink of cutlery. "Have you made progress in your investigation? The manor grows restless under this cloud of suspicion." Poirot dabbed his lips with a napkin, his movements deliberate. "Progress, Mademoiselle Langley, is like a fine wine. It requires time to mature. But rest assured, the little grey cells, they are at work. The truth, it will reveal itself." Beatrice's lips thinned, her grey eyes narrowing. "I hope so. Eleanor's death is a tragedy. But the longer it lingers, the more it taints us all." Marlowe shifted in his seat, his fork pausing mid-air. "Taints us? You speak as if we're all guilty, Beatrice." Her gaze snapped to him, sharp as a blade. "Some are guiltier than others, Richard. Eleanor deserved better than your attentions." The air crackled with tension, and Poirot's moustache twitched, his interest piqued. "Mademoiselle Langley," he said, his voice smooth as velvet, "your disapproval of Monsieur Marlowe, it is most pronounced. Was it only his lack of fortune that offended you, or something deeper?" Beatrice set down her glass, her movements precise. "Eleanor was reckless, Monsieur Poirot. She threw herself at a man unworthy of her name, a man who saw her as a means to an end. I tried to protect her, to make her see reason. But she was stubborn." "Protect her," Poirot repeated, his tone gentle but probing. "Or perhaps control her. The Haverford fortune, it is a heavy burden, oui? And you, as her cousin, stood to bear it if she fell." Beatrice's cheeks flushed, but her voice remained steady. "I've told you, I have my own income. I didn't need her money, but I cared for her, in my way." She was family. Marlowe's fist tightened around his napkin. "You never liked her, Beatrice. You envied her, her beauty, her freedom, her life. Don't pretend you were some saintly guardian." "Enough!" Beatrice's voice rose, a rare crack in her composure. "You dare accuse me when your own secrets are written all over your face." Clara, who had been refilling a water glass, flinched, spilling a few drops. Poirot's eyes flicked to her, noting her unease, then back to the sparring cousins. "Secrets, mademoiselle?" he said, his tone deceptively mild. "You speak of Monsieur Marlowe's acquaintance with Mademoiselle Florence Tate, perhaps?" Beatrice's lips curled in a faint, triumphant smile. "So, you've heard of her?" "Yes, I knew of Richard's little indiscretion. Eleanor deserved to know the truth about the man she planned to marry." Marlowe leapt to his feet, his chair scraping against the floor. "You had no right to meddle, Beatrice. Eleanor and I were happy until you filled her head with doubts." Poirot raised a hand, his gesture commanding silence. "Mes amis, let us not descend into chaos. Mademoiselle Langley, when did you learn of this indiscretion?" Beatrice smoothed her dress, regaining her composure. "A month ago. I saw them together in the village, whispering like conspirators. I told Eleanor she should be cautious, but she laughed it off. She was blind to his faults." Poirot's eyes gleamed, his mind weaving connections. "And you, mademoiselle, did you see the locket Eleanor wore? Did she ever speak of its contents?" Beatrice hesitated, her fingers tightening on her fork. "She wore it always, as I've said. She called it her mother's gift, a keepsake. I never saw it open, but she guarded it fiercely." Poirot nodded, filing away her words. The dinner continued in strained silence, broken only by the clink of silver and the soft tread of Clara's steps. As the meal ended, Poirot excused himself, catching Beatrice in the corridor outside the dining room. The hall was dim, lit by flickering sconces, and her shadow loomed large against the tapestried walls. "Mademoiselle Langley," Poirot said, his voice low. "Your concern for Eleanor, it was genuine, oui? Yet your words carry a bitterness. Was there envy, perhaps, for her youth, her charm, her freedom?" Beatrice's eyes flashed, but she held his gaze. "Envy? I'm not so petty, Monsieur Poirot. I wanted her to be wise, not reckless. She was throwing her life away on a man who didn't deserve her." "And you believed you knew what was best for her?" Poirot's question was a scalpel, probing for truth. "I knew her better than she knew herself," Beatrice said, her voice cold. "She was naive, easily swayed. I only wished to guide her." Poirot's moustache quivered, his mind noting the intensity in her words. "Guide her or shape her? The line, mademoiselle, it is a fine one. Merci for your candor." As Beatrice retreated, her footsteps echoing down the hall, Poirot rejoined Japp in the library, where a fire crackled in the grate. "She's a piece of work, that one," Japp said, tossing his notebook onto a table. "All that talk of protecting Eleanor, but it sounds like jealousy to me. And she knew about Marlowe's affair. Could have used it to drive a wedge between them." "Oui, Inspector," Poirot said, settling into a chair, his fingers steepled. "Mademoiselle Langley's envy is a thread in our tapestry. But is it the fatal one? She claims no need for Eleanor's fortune, yet her disapproval of Marlowe is almost personal. And her knowledge of the affair, it suggests she watched Eleanor closely, perhaps too closely." Japp rubbed his chin. "You think she could have killed Eleanor to get rid of Marlowe, or to claim the estate?" "It is possible," Poirot said, his eyes distant. "But the locked room, the broken locket, the empty pouch, these are not the acts of a woman driven by envy alone. They speak of calculation, of a plan. Beatrice is disciplined, oui, but is she cunning enough for such a deception?" He rose, pacing the library's polished floor, his little grey cells humming. The cousin's envy was a potent force, he thought, but it was entangled with Marlowe's secrets and Clara's fear. The locket, shattered in Eleanor's hand, was the heart of the mystery, and Beatrice's knowledge of it, however limited, made her a figure to watch. As the manor's clock struck 9, Poirot's resolve hardened. The truth was a shadow, but Hercule Poirot would chase it until it stood in the light. Chapter 8. The scratch revealed. The moon hung low over Haverford Manor, its pale light seeping through the tall windows of Eleanor Haverford's bedroom, casting eerie shadows across the lavender drapes and the polished floor. Hercule Poirot stood alone in the room, a lantern in his gloved hand, its soft glow illuminating the scene of the crime. The air was still, heavy with the lingering scent of jasmine and the unspoken weight of death. His small, meticulous figure moved with purpose, his green eyes sharp as he retraced the steps of his earlier inspection. The broken locket, the locked door, the faint scratch on the floor. They were pieces of a puzzle that refused to align. But Poirot's little grey cells were relentless, seeking the pattern beneath the chaos. He knelt beside the bed, the lantern casting a warm circle of light on the Persian rug. The scratch he had noticed before, a faint scar in the wood near the bedpost, nagged at him like an unresolved chord. He set the lantern down and ran his fingers along the mark, its edges precise, not the random scuff of a struggle. "Mon Dieu," he murmured, his moustache twitching. This is no accident. Something was moved here. Something significant. With careful precision, he lifted the rug's edge, revealing the loose floorboard he had discovered earlier. The velvet pouch, empty but telling, lay in his pocket, a silent witness to a secret stolen. Poirot's mind churned, reconstructing the scene. Eleanor strangled, her hand clutching the shattered locket, the killer searching for something hidden beneath the floor. The pouch had once held the locket's contents, a photograph, a note, a token of betrayal. But now it was gone, taken by a hand that knew where to look. He rose, his lantern sweeping the room, and approached the oak door, its bolt now unlatched, but still bearing the marks of Hargreaves's forced entry. The faint abrasion on the bolt, noticed during his earlier inspection, gleamed in the lantern's light, a subtle clue, but one that whispered of cunning. A thread, perhaps, Poirot mused, pulled through the keyhole to slide the bolt after the deed. A simple trick, yet effective, for one who knows the art of deception. He stepped back, his eyes narrowing as he envisioned the killer's movements. They had entered the room, perhaps under the guise of a visit, strangled Eleanor in a moment of calculated violence, and then broken the locket to suggest a struggle. The pouch's contents were their true target, and they had known precisely where to find them. This was no crime of passion, but a meticulously planned act designed to mislead. Poirot's thoughts turned to the suspects. Richard Marlowe, with his hidden affair and trembling hands, had motive to silence Eleanor's accusations. Beatrice Langley, her envy cloaked in righteousness, might have sought to control the estate or eliminate a rival. Clara Dobbs, timid but observant, could be hiding knowledge or guilt behind her nervous eyes. Each had access to the manor, each a piece of the puzzle. But who had the cunning to orchestrate such a deception? He left the room, locking the door behind him, and descended to the library, where Inspector Japp waited, his face etched with fatigue. The fire had dwindled to embers, and Japp sat slumped in an armchair, a glass of brandy untouched before him. "Any luck, Poirot?" he asked, his voice heavy. "I've been over my notes a dozen times, and we're no closer to cracking this locked room nonsense." Poirot settled into a chair, his movements precise as he adjusted his cuffs. "Nonsense, mon ami. No, it is a riddle, and the scratch on the floor has revealed its first answer. The killer knew of the pouch beneath the floorboard, a secret hiding place for Mademoiselle Eleanor's most private treasure. The locket was broken to distract us, but the true theft was the contents of that pouch." Japp's eyebrows rose. "You're sure it was stolen? Couldn't Eleanor have emptied it herself?" "No," Poirot said firmly. "Her diary spoke of a truth held in the locket, a truth she feared would break her heart. She would not discard it. The killer took it to hide evidence. Perhaps a photograph of Monsieur Marlowe and Mademoiselle Florence Tart, proof of his infidelity." Japp leaned forward, his interest piqued. "So Marlowe's our man. He kills her to keep his affair quiet, smashes the locket, and takes the photograph. But how'd he lock the door?" "The bolt," Poirot said, his eyes gleaming, "was manipulated. A thread or wire, pulled through the keyhole, could slide it into place from outside. It is a trick I have seen before, in a case long ago. The killer needed only a moment to execute it, and the manor's silence at dawn provided the opportunity." Japp whistled softly. "That's clever, Poirot. But it could be any of them. Marlowe, Beatrice, even Clara. They all know the house." "Oui, But knowledge alone is not enough, Poirot said, his fingers tapping his knee. The killer required motive, opportunity, and the nerve to act. Marlowe's affair gives him motive, but Beatrice's envy and Clara's fear, they, too, are threads in our tapestry. We must tug each one carefully. He rose, pacing the library's polished floor, his mind a whirl of connections. The scratch revealed a calculated mind, one that knew Eleanor's secrets and the Manor's layout. Beatrice's solitary walk, unverified, placed her near the scene. Marlowe's room, close to Eleanor's, offered easy access. Clara, in the pantry, had an alibi, but her nervousness suggested she saw or heard something she dared not speak. And the locket, its crimson heart shattered, was a symbol of a truth too dangerous to survive. "Inspector," Poirot said, pausing by the fireplace, "we must search the suspect's rooms again. The stolen contents of the pouch may still be in the Manor, hidden where the killer feels safe. And we must watch Mademoiselle Dobbs. Her fear, it is a beacon, guiding us to a truth she may not yet understand." Japp nodded, draining his brandy. "Right. I'll get the constables to do a thorough search tomorrow. But Poirot, what if the killer destroyed the photograph, or whatever it was? Then we look for what is missing," Poirot said, his voice soft but resolute. "The absence of evidence, mon ami, is as telling as its presence. The scratch has revealed the killer's intent, and Hercule Poirot will follow it to the end." As the Manor's clock struck midnight, its chimes echoing through the silent halls, Poirot stood by the window, gazing at the moonlit gardens. The scratch on the floor was a crack in the killer's facade, and the empty pouch was a void that screamed of purpose. The truth was close, he felt, hidden in the shadows of Haverford Manor, waiting for his little grey cells to bring it into the light. Chapter 9. The confrontation or the drawing room of Haverford Manor was a grand stage for the unfolding drama, its high ceilings and gilded mouldings a stark contrast to the tension that crackled like static among its occupants. The morning light filtered through heavy velvet curtains, casting a muted glow on the polished mahogany furniture and the sombre faces of the gathered suspects. Hercule Poirot stood at the centre of the room, his small, immaculate figure commanding attention, his green eyes gleaming with the intensity of a man who had glimpsed the truth. Inspector Japp flanked him, his notebook tucked away, his expression a mix of skepticism and anticipation. The air was thick with expectation, as if the very walls held their breath. Seated before them were the three suspects. Richard Marlowe, his handsome features taut, his hands clasped tightly to hide their tremor. Beatrice Langley, her posture rigid, her grey eyes cold and unyielding. And Clara Dobbs, perched on the edge of a chair, her mousy demeanour betrayed by the nervous twisting of her apron. Hargreaves, the butler, and Mrs. Grayson, the housekeeper, stood discreetly by the door, their presence a silent acknowledgment of the Manor's disrupted order. "Mes amis," Poirot began, his voice a quiet melody that drew every eye. "We are gathered to unravel the mystery of Mademoiselle Eleanor Haverford's death. A young woman, vibrant and beloved, was taken from us in a locked room, her hand clutching a broken locket, her life extinguished by a calculated act. But the locked room, it is not the enigma it seems. The truth, it lies in the details, the scratch on the floor, the empty pouch, the shattered locket, and today Hercule Poirot will reveal the killer." A murmur rippled through the room, and Marlowe's head snapped up, his eyes wide. "You've found the murderer?" he asked, his voice hoarse. Poirot's moustache twitched, a faint smile playing at his lips. "Oui, monsieur. But first, let us reconstruct the crime. The door was bolted from the inside, the window locked, yet someone entered, strangled Mademoiselle Eleanor, and left without a trace. How, you ask? A simple trick. A thread, pulled through the keyhole, to slide the bolt into place after the deed. It is a method known to those who study the art of deception, and it was executed with precision." Beatrice's lips thinned, her voice sharp. "A trick? You suggest someone in this house is a conjurer, Monsieur Poirot?" "Not a conjurer, mademoiselle," Poirot said, his gaze locking onto hers, "but a planner. The killer knew the manor's secrets, or the secrets of Mademoiselle Eleanor's heart. The locket, broken in her hand, was a distraction, meant to suggest a struggle. But the true theft was beneath the floorboard, where an empty velvet pouch once held a photograph of Monsieur Marlowe and Mademoiselle Florence Tate, proof of his infidelity." Marlowe leapt to his feet, his face flushed. "That's a lie. I never—" "Silence, monsieur," Poirot commanded, his voice cutting through the protest like a blade. "The diary of Mademoiselle Eleanor speaks of a truth that broke her heart, a letter she found. We discovered such a letter in your room, from Mademoiselle Tate, pleading for your affection. Eleanor confronted you, did she not? She threatened to expose your betrayal, to end your engagement, to ruin your prospects." Marlowe's shoulders slumped, his voice barely audible. She found the letter. We argued, yes. But I didn't kill her. I loved her." Beatrice's eyes flashed with disdain. "Love? You betrayed her with that village girl. Eleanor deserved better." Clara flinched, her hands tightening on her apron, but she said nothing. Poirot's gaze flicked to her, noting her silence, then returned to Marlowe. "You loved her, monsieur. But love is a fragile thing when trust is broken. You were in the manor that night, your room close to hers. You had opportunity, motive, and the knowledge to execute the trick with the bolt. A trick you learned, perhaps, from a novel in this very library, why?" Marlowe shook his head, his voice desperate. "I swear, I didn't do it. I was asleep until Clara's scream woke me." Poirot's eyes narrowed, turning to Beatrice. "And you, Mademoiselle Langley, you knew of Monsieur Marlowe's indiscretion. You told Eleanor, did you not, hoping to protect her, or to drive a wedge between them? Your envy of her freedom, her wealth, it was a fire in your heart. Did it burn hot enough to kill?" Beatrice's face paled, but her voice was steady. "I told her the truth about Richard because she needed to know. I didn't kill her. I was in the gardens at dawn, as I've said." "An alibi unwitnessed," Poirot said, his tone gentle but relentless. "And you, Mademoiselle Dobbs?" He turned to Clara, who shrank under his gaze. "You heard the argument between Eleanor and Monsieur Marlowe. You saw her distress. Did you know of the pouch beneath the floorboard? Did you see something that morning? Something you fear to speak?" Clara's eyes filled with tears, her voice a whisper. I didn't see anything, sir. I was in the pantry, polishing the silver. I swear it." Poirot clasped his hands behind his back, pacing slowly before them. "The scratch on the floor, the empty pouch, the broken locket. These are not random acts. The killer planned this murder, knew where to find the photograph, and used the locket to mislead us. But Hercule Poirot sees through the deception. Monsieur Marlowe, your secret gave you motive, and your proximity gave you opportunity. You strangled Eleanor to silence her, broke the locket to suggest a struggle, and took the photograph to protect your future." Marlowe's face crumpled, and he sank back into his chair, his voice breaking. "I didn't mean to kill her. She confronted me that night, said she'd end the engagement, tell everyone about Florence. I lost control. I grabbed her scarf, and before I knew it, she was gone. I panicked, broke the locket, took the photograph from the pouch. I used a thread to lock the door, like in that novel I read." Japp stepped forward, his handcuffs glinting in the light. "Richard Marlowe, you're under arrest for the murder of Eleanor Haverford. Belgian system." As Clara gasped, Beatrice's eyes widened, but she remained silent, her composure a mask of shock. Poirot raised a hand, his expression grave. "The truth, mes amis, it cannot be locked away forever. Monsieur Marlowe's guilt is clear, but let us not forget the pain of betrayal that set this tragedy in motion." The room was silent as Japp led Marlowe away, his confession hanging like a shroud. Poirot's little grey cells had triumphed, but the victory was bittersweet, for the heart of Haverford Manor was forever broken. Chapter 10. The Confession. The drawing-room of Haverford Manor, once a stage for tense confrontations, now felt like a mausoleum, its grandeur muted by the weight of Richard Marlowe's confession. The chandelier's crystals caught the fading daylight, casting fractured prisms across the faces of those who remained. Hercule Poirot stood near the fireplace, his small, meticulous figure a beacon of order in the aftermath of a chaos. His green eyes, sharp and unyielding, surveyed the room. Noting the shock in Beatrice Langley's rigid posture, the tears streaming down Clara Dobbs's pale cheeks, and the stoic silence of Hargreaves and Mrs. Grayson by the door. Inspector Japp, his handcuffs still glinting from securing Marlowe, stood beside the now empty chair where the accused had sat, his expression a mix of satisfaction and weariness. "Mon Dieu," Poirot said softly, his voice cutting through the heavy silence. "The truth. It is a bitter fruit, yet it must be tasted. Monsieur Marlowe has confessed to the murder of Mademoiselle Eleanor Haverford, but let us examine the path that led to this moment, for understanding is as vital as justice." Japp, wiping his brow, nodded. "He spilled it all, Poirot. Strangled her in a fit of panic, broke the locket to throw us off, and used that thread trick to lock the door. It's as neat a case as I've seen, thanks to you." Poirot's moustache twitched, but his smile was absent. "Neat, perhaps, but not without its shadows. Let us retrace the steps, Inspector, to ensure no thread remains untied." He turned to the remaining occupants, his gaze settling on Beatrice. "Mademoiselle Langley, you suspected Monsieur Marlowe's infidelity, did you not? You spoke to Eleanor of his liaison with Mademoiselle Florence Tate, hoping to protect her, or to shape her choices?" Beatrice's grey eyes met his, her composure restored, but brittle. "I told her the truth, Monsieur Poirot, as I've said. I saw Richard with that woman in the village, and I couldn't let Eleanor marry a man who would betray her. I had no hand in her death." Poirot nodded, his expression unreadable. "Your intentions, they may have been noble, but envy, it is a subtle poison. Your disapproval of Eleanor's freedom, her choice of love, it colored your actions, oui?" Beatrice's lips tightened, but she said nothing, her silence a wall. Poirot turned to Clara, who was dabbing her eyes with her apron. "And you, Mademoiselle Dobbs, you heard the argument between Eleanor and Monsieur Marlowe. You saw her distress, yet you kept silent. Why?" Clara's voice trembled, barely audible. I was afraid, sir. I didn't want to cause trouble. Miss Eleanor was so kind to me, and I couldn't bear to see her hurt. When I found her, I thought maybe she'd fainted. But then I saw the locket, all broken, and I knew it was worse. Poirot's gaze softened, but his mind remained sharp. Your fear. It is understandable, but it hid a truth that might have helped sooner. The locket, the pouch beneath the floorboard. You saw nothing of these before her death? Clara shook her head, her tears falling faster. No, sir. I only knew she cherished that locket. I never saw what was inside. Poirot clasped his hands behind his back, pacing slowly before the fireplace. The confession of Monsieur Marlowe, it is complete, yet it leaves echoes. He admitted to strangling Eleanor in a moment of desperation, fearing her threat to expose his affair. He broke the locket to suggest a struggle, took the photograph from the pouch to hide his shame, and used a thread to lock the door. A trick he learned, he said, from a novel in this very library. Japp interjected, his tone gruff. He named the book Poirot. The Locked Door Mystery. I checked the library shelves. And it's there, dog-eared at the chapter on belt tricks. The man planned it all right. Oui, Inspector, Poirot said, his eyes distant. But planning, it requires a coldness, and Monsieur Marlowe's confession speaks of panic. This is the final thread we must examine. Let us hear his words again, in the calm of this moment. Japp signalled to a constable, who escorted Marlowe back into the room, his wrists bound, his face ashen. The once charming lover was a broken man, his eyes hollow with guilt. Monsieur Marlowe, Poirot said, his voice gentle but firm, you have confessed to the murder of Mademoiselle Eleanor. But tell us, in your own words, how it came to pass. Leave nothing out. Marlowe's voice was low, faltering. It was late, after midnight. Eleanor came to my room, furious. She'd found Florence's letter in my desk. She said she'd tell everyone, call off the wedding, ruin me. I tried to calm her, but she wouldn't listen. We went to her room to talk privately. She was waving that locket, saying it held her truth. I grabbed her scarf, just to stop her shouting. I didn't mean to kill her. It happened so fast. When I realized she was gone, I panicked. I smashed the locket to make it look like a robbery, found the pouch under the floorboard. She'd shown it to me once, said it was her secret place. I took the photograph of me and Florence, then used a thread to lock the door, like in that novel. I thought it would buy me time. Poirot's eyes narrowed, his mind sifting through the words. The photograph, monsieur. Where is it now? Marlowe swallowed hard. I burned it in my room's fireplace that night. There's nothing left. Japp nodded, satisfied. We'll search the fireplace, but it fits, Poirot. The ashes, the thread, the broken locket. It all lines up. Poirot's gaze lingered on Marlowe, then shifted to the others. The confession, it is compelling, yet the heart of this crime is betrayal. Monsieur Marlowe betrayed Eleanor's love, and in his fear he took her life. The locket, a symbol of her mother's love, was shattered to hide his shame. But let us not forget the manor's other secrets, envy, fear, silence. These too played their part. Beatrice rose, her voice cold. You've done your work, Monsieur Poirot. Justice will be served. May Eleanor rest now. Clara sobbed quietly, and Hargreaves stepped forward, his voice steady. Shall I prepare the house for the constables, sir? Japp nodded. Yes, Hargreaves. We'll need statements from everyone before we leave. As Marlowe was led away again, Poirot stood by the window, the weight of the case settling on his shoulders. The confession had closed the circle, but the echoes of Eleanor's life, her trust, her pain, lingered in the room. The crimson locket, broken and empty, was a mirror of her heart, and Poirot felt a pang of sorrow for the young woman whose light had been extinguished. "Inspector," he said quietly, "the case is solved, but the heart, it mourns. Let us ensure the truth is honoured, for Mademoiselle Eleanor's sake." Chapter 11. The Aftermath. The morning sun rose over Haverford Manor, its golden rays piercing the mist that clung to the manicured gardens, as if to cleanse the estate of the darkness that had enveloped it. The grand house, with its towering chimneys and ivy-clad walls, stood silent, its opulence muted by the weight of recent events. Hercule Poirot stood by a tall window in the library, his small, meticulous figure framed against the light, his hands clasped behind his back. His green eyes, usually sharp with purpose, held a quiet melancholy as he gazed at the dew-kissed roses below. The crimson locket, its mystery solved, lay heavy in his thoughts, a symbol of love betrayed and life extinguished. Inspector Japp entered, his footsteps heavy on the polished floor, his face etched with the fatigue of a case concluded. He carried a folder of papers, the final reports for the Haverford murder, and set them on a table with a sigh. "It's done, Poirot," he said, rubbing his neck. "Marlowe's in custody, and the evidence is airtight. His confession, the novel with the bolt trick, the ashes in his fireplace. The coroner's inquest will be a formality. You've done it again." Poirot turned, his moustache twitching faintly, but his smile was subdued. "The little grey cells, mon ami, they have served justice. But the heart, it feels the cost. Mademoiselle Eleanor Haverford was a light, snuffed out by fear and betrayal. Her death, it leaves a shadow on this house." Japp nodded, settling into an armchair. "Aye, it's a grim business, but you saw through it all. The locket, the pouch, that blasted thread trick. How'd you know it was Marlowe, Poirot?" "Really?" Poirot paced slowly, his patent leather shoes clicking softly. "It was the locket, Inspector. Always the locket. Its destruction was too deliberate, a calculated act to mislead. The scratch on the floor, the empty pouch beneath the floorboard, these pointed to a killer who knew Eleanor's secrets, who feared her discovery of the photograph. Monsieur Marlowe's confession confirmed what the little grey cells suspected. A man driven by desperation, not passion, but by the need to protect his future." Japp frowned, flipping open his folder. And Beatrice Langley. She was so sure Marlowe was a fortune hunter. Could she have been involved, stirring the pot? Poirot shook his head, his expression thoughtful. Mademoiselle Langley's envy was real, her disapproval of Marlowe a fire in her heart. But her role was that of a catalyst, not a killer. She told Eleanor of the affair, hoping to sway her, but she did not wield the scarf that ended her life. Her alibi, though unwitnessed, held no contradiction with the timeline. "And Clara Dobbs?" Japp asked, his brow furrowing. She was terrified, but her alibi checked out. "Oui," Poirot said, pausing by the fireplace, where embers glowed faintly. Mademoiselle Dobbs was a witness to Eleanor's distress, overhearing the argument, seeing the pain. Her fear was genuine, but it was the fear of one who serves, not one who kills. Her role was to find the body, to set the stage for our investigation. Japp leaned back, his hands folded. So it all comes back to Marlowe. He's the one who broke the locket, took the photograph, locked the door. But why go to all that trouble? Why not just run? Poirot's eyes gleamed, his voice soft but firm. Because, mon ami, he wished to remain the grieving fiancé, not the hunted murderer. The broken locket was a diversion, suggesting a struggle or theft. The photograph, burned to ashes, hid his shame. The locked door, secured by a thread, was his attempt to defy suspicion. But Hercule Poirot sees what others overlook, the order beneath the chaos. The library door opened, and Beatrice Langley entered, her grey dress as severe as her expression. Her steps were measured, but her eyes held a softness Poirot had not seen before. "Monsieur Poirot," she said, her voice steady but quieter than usual. "I owe you my thanks. Eleanor's killer is found, and though it cannot bring her back, it brings some measure of peace." Poirot bowed slightly, his manner courteous. "Justice, mademoiselle, is the only rest for the dead. But tell me, do you feel the weight of this truth? You suspected Monsieur Marlowe, yet you did not foresee the depth of his betrayal." Beatrice's lips pressed together, her gaze dropping to the floor. "I should have done more. I saw his falseness, but I thought Eleanor would see it too, in time. I was wrong." Poirot's voice was gentle, but his words carried weight. "Envy, mademoiselle, clouded your vision, but it didn't make you a murderer. You sought to protect her, in your way. Let that be your solace." Beatrice nodded, her eyes glistening briefly before she turned away, retreating to the solitude of the manor's halls. Poirot watched her go, his thoughts turning to the fragile bonds of family, broken by suspicion and loss. Japp rose, gathering his papers. "I'll be off to file the reports, Poirot. The constables will handle the rest. You staying on?" "Non, Inspector," Poirot said, adjusting his tie. "My work here is done. The train to London awaits, and Hercule Poirot must return to his little flat, where order reigns. But I leave with a heavy heart, for this manor will not soon forget its sorrow." As Japp departed, Poirot lingered, his gaze drifting to a portrait above the fireplace. A young Eleanor, her smile radiant, a silver locket gleaming at her throat. The crimson enamel, now shattered, had been her mother's gift, a talisman of love that became a symbol of betrayal. "Adieu, mademoiselle," he murmured. "Your truth is known, and your justice is served." The library's clock ticked softly, marking the passage of a case closed, but Poirot knew the echoes of Eleanor's death would linger in Haverford Manor's halls, a reminder that even the grandest houses could not escape the shadows of the human heart. Chapter 12. The Departure. The platform at Haverford Station was a quiet tableau, bathed in the pale light of an early morning sun that struggled to pierce the autumn mist. Hercule Poirot stood beside his neatly packed suitcase, his black overcoat buttoned against the chill, his patent leather shoes gleaming despite the dust of the journey. His moustache, a masterpiece of symmetry, was as impeccable as ever, but his green eyes held a reflective depth, as if the weight of Eleanor Haverford's tragedy lingered in his thoughts. The steam train, its engine hissing softly, waited to carry him back to the orderly sanctuary of his London flat, yet Poirot paused, gazing at the distant silhouette of Haverford Manor, its chimneys just visible through the fog. Inspector Japp joined him, his hat pulled low, his hands thrust into his pockets. The bustle of the station, porters with trunks, a newsboy calling out headlines, seemed distant, as if the two men existed in a bubble of their own making. "Well, Poirot," Japp said, his voice gruff but warm, "you've done it again. Marlowe's locked up, the case is closed, and the Haverford family can try to move on. though I reckon that manner'll never be the same." Poirot nodded, his expression sombre. "Oui, mon ami. Justice has been served, but the heart of Haverford Manor, it is wounded. Mademoiselle Eleanor was its light, and her loss casts a shadow that will not fade easily." Japp shifted, glancing at the train as a whistle sounded. "You're sure about Marlowe? No loose ends? I keep thinking about Beatrice Langley's envy, or Clara Dobbs's nerves. Could we have missed something?" Poirot's moustache twitched, a faint smile breaking through his melancholy. "The little grey cells, they do not miss, Inspector. Monsieur Marlowe's confession was complete, his motive rooted in fear of exposure, his method revealed by the thread and the novel, his theft of the photograph confirmed by the empty pouch. Beatrice's envy, it stirred the pot, but it did not wield the scarf. Clara's fear, it hid no guilt, only the pain of a loyal servant. The locket, broken and crimson, was the key, and it has unlocked the truth." Japp chuckled, shaking his head. "You and your locket, Poirot. I'll never understand how you see so much in a bit of smashed jewellery." "Not jewellery, mon ami," Poirot said, his voice soft but firm, "but a symbol. The locket was Mademoiselle Eleanor's heart, given by her mother, holding her deepest truth. Its destruction was Monsieur Marlowe's attempt to erase his betrayal. But the truth, it cannot be broken so easily." Hercule Poirot sees the order beneath the chaos. A porter called out, signalling the train's imminent departure, and Poirot lifted his suitcase, his movements precise. "Come, Inspector. Let us not delay. London awaits, and there are other mysteries, other hearts to mend." As they boarded the train, Poirot took a window seat, his gaze drifting to the receding view of Haverford village. The cottages, the church spire, the rolling fields, they faded into the mist. But the memory of Eleanor's portrait, her radiant smile, and the crimson locket at her throat remained vivid. The case had been a dance of deception, with threads of envy, fear, and betrayal weaving a deadly pattern. Marlowe's panic had led to murder, but it was Eleanor's trust, so cruelly shattered, that haunted Poirot most. He opened his notebook, its pages filled with meticulous notes in his elegant script, and added a final entry. "The heart. It is the most dangerous locked room of all. For Mademoiselle Eleanor, may peace be yours." Closing the notebook, he leaned back, the rhythmic clatter of the train a soothing counterpoint to his thoughts. Japp, seated opposite, lit a pipe, the smoke curling lazily. "What's next, Poirot? A holiday, maybe? You've earned it." Poirot's eyes twinkled, his melancholy lifting. "A holiday, mon ami? No, the little grey cells, they do not rest. There are always mysteries, always truths to uncover. And Hercule Poirot, he will be ready." As the train steamed toward London, carrying him away from the shadows of Haverford Manor, Poirot felt a quiet resolve. The Crimson Locket had told its story, and though its tale was one of sorrow, it had led to justice. The world, with all its secrets, awaited, and Poirot's journey was far from over.